Hi, everyone, and welcome to Mental Health Matters. Today, we are talking about strategies for supporting mental health in school-aged children. At the end of this presentation, you will have an opportunity to ask questions, so please feel free to enter your questions in the Q&A box at any time throughout our presentation, and we will do our best to answer as many as we can. My name is Bethany Brewin, and I am the occupational therapist on the subject matter expert team here at Autism Ontario. And I'm joined today by my colleague Danielle. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Danielle, and I'm the social worker on the subject matter expert team here at AO.
Thanks, Danielle. So to give us a bit of an overview of today's presentation, as I mentioned, we are focusing on strategies for school-aged children. So we'll first review and discuss some lifestyle strategies, as well as looking at learning about emotions and building what we call emotional literacy. So we'll look at some steps like internal awareness, practicing labeling emotions, and then resolving our feeling. We'll also talk about some brain and body strategies, including some sensory strategies and mindfulness. And we will discuss attachment strategies around building connection, and finally, some creative arts strategies. As we just mentioned, we're going to be talking today about several different types of strategies. For example, we'll be talking about lifestyle strategies and parenting strategies that can help to support your whole family's mental health. These are things you can try if they seem like they would support your family. On the other hand, the brain and body strategies will be more applicable to your autistic child, and you may want to trial some of these with your child a few at a time. It's also important to note as you're trialing these different strategies that it can be helpful to keep a record of what strategies you try and what the impact is. If you have access to a therapy team, they can help you to collect information on whether a strategy is working or not and how to adjust or change the strategy to try something else. If you don't have access to a therapy team, it can be helpful to use a journal or to keep a record of how your child is doing before you try a strategy, and then keeping notes on what it looks like after you try the strategy. Keeping in mind that change can take time, and sometimes change happens in very small steps, a little bit at a time. Try to be patient with yourself and with your child and celebrate each accomplishment, even if it's small. So the first set of strategies we're going to address is what we are calling lifestyle or environmental strategies. You may remember that when we're talking about mental health, we're talking about our thoughts, our feelings, and behaviors, and how we respond to stress or challenges in our day-to-day life. Stress or challenges might look like something that's happening around us in our environment, maybe a loud sound. It might be learning a new skill, which could be a school skill like reading, or a life skill like opening a container. Or it might be a change in our normal routine, maybe a new teacher or a change in our schedule. Lifestyle strategies are those environmental things we can put into place throughout our day and from day to day that increase those feelings of safety, security, and predictability, and help our brains to feel calm and regulated. Here are some examples. So listed here on the slide, the first is having a predictable schedule, which means we don't have to do things at exactly the same time or in exactly the same order every day, but there's a flow and a structure to the day without a lot of new challenges. We can use visuals that help us to communicate clear expectations and if there's any changes in schedule. And again, the purpose of keeping things predictable is that we're limiting the amount of surprises or changes that our child may perceive as stressful. If we want to look at some more examples of lifestyle strategies, we may want to consider how we're planning our daily schedule. Ideally, we want to aim for a mix of high and low energy activities. So for example, we want to make sure there's a flow to the day with opportunities for movement or exercise and getting outside, like playing at a playground, or maybe times for calming or soothing and collecting activities like reading a book together. We also want to look at how we're managing transitions or times when we're switching gears from one activity to the next. We want to offer clear communication. So for example, giving a 5-minute warning before we switch from one activity to another. And we also want to plan ahead to have some transition strategies in place. Maybe our child is carrying an object with them that reminds them or helps them to transition to the next activity. So an example might be if you're going to the grocery store as a family, maybe your child is helping to carry the reusable shopping bags or grocery bags to the car as a cue and a reminder. Maybe we have a special song that we like to play when it's dinner time to get everyone to come to the table. In terms of lifestyle strategies, we also want to think about screen time and how that may be contributing to our child's ability to stay regulated throughout the day. Research shows that autistic children are exposed to more screen time than their neurotypical peers. We know that screen time is inevitable in our culture, so we want to be mindful of the amount of screen time we're giving our children, as well as paying attention to the type of screen time. For example, watching a movie as a family or FaceTiming with a friend is a very different type of screen time from playing a video game. We can look for quality sources of content and do our best to engage with our child when they're interacting with screens. Finally, we want to do our best to track the length or the amount of screen time. And the Hospital for Sick Kids recommends that children and teens ages 5 to 17 have less than 2 hours of screen time per day. Now I'll invite Danielle to tell us about strategies for building emotional literacy.
Thanks, Bethany. For those of you who watched our introductory video, these steps will be familiar. If not, the introduction is linked below on the resource list, and I encourage you to watch it as it talks about how and why these skills are important. They are the processes or steps needed to be able to independently cope with stress and self-regulate. To be able to effectively self-regulate and calm themselves independently, your child needs to have an internal awareness of how they feel in their body, match that feeling to an emotion or word label that they understand, and then find ways to resolve that feeling. And this is really, really hard. Before children can begin to self-regulate or cope, they need to understand what's happening in their bodies. As we introduced, the concept is called interoception. The perception of sensations from inside the body, including the nervous system, related to emotions. The way our body and brain processes information from our internal and external environments can contribute to feelings of calm or feelings of upset. School-age children can begin to understand what the sensations in their body are telling them. You may want to introduce language around when your child is feeling hot or cold that they may need to wear a different item of clothing. Or if they're hungry and notice that their tummy is growling, they can ask for a snack. This is the same as with our emotions, and we're going to talk about how to practice labeling our emotions next. If you're interested in more about interoception, the resource list below has information on Kelly Mailer's website, and she's an occupational therapist who specializes in interoception. Her website has a variety of resources on this topic, including courses and activities. She has a whole curriculum if you're working with an occupational therapist who may need some ideas on how to teach this skill. Once kids begin to understand their body sensations, they need to know what emotions are. This seems implicit to us because we can tell the difference between sad, angry, worried, embarrassed, guilty, but kids don't always know what these feel like. Books, games, movies, and other media sources can be used to teach emotional literacy to your kids in a way that makes sense to them. The Inside Out movie is one example of a resource that can help build emotional literacy because it introduces kids to the 5 emotions of disgust, fear, joy, sadness, and anger. There's also a variety of books and YouTube videos that we have listed on our resource list. The idea is that the resources provide examples, and together you can say this character is feeling sad when something happens. For example, in Frozen, when Elsa is scared, she reacts by sending ice around her and freezing everything. As a next step, you can tell your child, I'm noticing that you are sad that you had to stop playing Lego. I'm noticing that you're crying. Once your child can label their emotions, they can start to label their fears or their worries or their anxious feelings. Parents play an important role in helping children label these worries and understand what they're feeling. Normalizing worries and validating your child's feelings is a strategy in reducing their distress. This means that by telling your child it's okay to feel sad, they're more likely to be accepting of these big emotions and more likely to cope with their stress. We're going to talk now about 4 different groups of strategies that your child can use to resolve their stress or worry or anxious feeling. Eventually, these strategies can be done independently, but that takes a lot of practice. So it's your role as a parent to teach these skills and help your child practice and learn. I'm going to pass it off to Bethany now to get us started.
Thanks, Danielle. So the first set of strategies for resolving the feeling are brain-body strategies related to sensory processing and sensory tools. Our brain-body sensory strategies include tools related to seeking behaviors. So if you have a busy child who's constantly looking for more sensory input, they may benefit from sensory tools and strategies that address or offer movement, like jumping or spinning, rhythm, like music, rhythmic movement such as rocking or swinging, deep pressure like a big hug or a weighted blanket, heavy work such as wearing a heavy backpack, and tactile exploration like using craft materials like slime or foam or bubbles or Play-Doh. If, on the other hand, your child is easily overwhelmed by certain sensations or aspects of the environment, so what we call sensory avoiding, they may benefit from tools and strategies that help to reduce or dampen these sensations. Things like sensory headphones to reduce noise, sunglasses to reduce bright lights or glare, or having a cozy corner or a quiet space to hang out to calm our nervous system. So we just talked about some examples of sensory tools your child might use to help them stay calm and regulated. And you can keep in mind that your child's school may have some of these tools on hand, or you might already be using some of these at home. Your child might want to put these sensory tools in a special box or a bag or a backpack so they can take them with them when they go out in the community. Some of those examples are things like chewing gum or hard candy, an oral chewy or fidget tools, movement cushion, or a chair or bouncy band. And keeping in mind that sensory tools are best prescribed by an occupational therapist. And if you do have access to an OT or your child has access at school to an OT, they can recommend the kind that's best suited for your child. OTs and BCBAs can also help your family to support monitoring the use of sensory tools to see if they're achieving their intended goals. If you're interested and you'd like more information about your child's sensory needs, you can access the Autism Ontario webinar series called Exploring the Senses, and the link to that it can be found in our resource section here. I will now invite Danielle to help us explore some strategies for mindfulness.
Another brain-body strategy is mindfulness. Mindfulness is an approach to mental health where people are trained to pay attention to the moment and bring awareness to their body's sensations, feelings, thoughts, and senses. These strategies have aspects of breathing and focusing our attention. And research shows that mindfulness activities consistently have a positive impact on the well-being of autistic children and their families. This card is an example from the Little Renegades Mindfulness Kids cards. The cards have breathing exercises, mantras, yoga stretches, and other fun things for kids. Here's another example. The first breathing exercise is called Calm Down Cocoa, and it involves using your hands to pretend that you're holding a hot mug. You can show your child how to take a deep breath in, pretending that they're smelling that sweet chocolate smell, and then as they take a deep breath out, they can pretend they're cooling down the hot drink. Another fun one is to pretend on the exhale that they're actually moving imaginary marshmallows around on the top of the mug. Sometimes strategies like this feel too abstract or too pretend for children, so it might be helpful to actually have a hot cup of chocolate to practice on. There are tons of options for mindfulness activities and exercises. You can find them on Pinterest or our resource list. And there's also podcasts that might be helpful for your child. Bedtime Explorers is a really popular one for school-aged kids. The next set of strategies focus on building attachment and connectingness that we talked about in the introduction as being the framework for positive mental health and well-being. Autistic children struggle to form relationships and connect with others, but that doesn't mean they can't or don't want to. Autistic children benefit from attachment relationships the same way neurotypical children do. This means that their relationships with their primary caregivers, you as their parents, reduces stress, improves coping, and better prepares them to go out in the world. There are a few different books that I like to use to teach these connections and to build on them. The Invisible String by Patricia Karst and The Kissing Hand by Audrey Penn are both beautiful books about the connection between parents and children when they're apart. Using books to improve mental health is a proven therapy technique called bibliotherapy. Bibliotherapy sends the message to kids that it's okay to talk about the issue in the book and work towards a solution. The important thing to remember is that reading these books with your children provides them with a concrete example that they can relate to, but they're also benefiting from spending close time with you, talking about the characters, their problems, and their solutions. The time, the discussion, and the closeness is just as important as the actual story. You can also do crafts meant to build on these connections that they talk about in the books. For the kissing hand, you can paint your hand and your child's hands and make handprints. These handprints can go in your child's backpack or to school. and can be a reminder for them when they got off the bus. They can also practice feeling your palm against the side of their face, and they can remind themselves of that later on. Similarly, you can cut lengths of string and stretch them out wide, just like this, from the invisible string. And the idea is that you can tell your child that that's how big your hug is. That's how much you miss them. So being playful and creative helps children remember the strategies that we have talked about. The last group of strategies that we want to share today are creative arts therapies. Art therapy aims to improve self esteem and coping skills and minimize stress. It includes all kinds of the arts, including drama, music, dance, photography, and visual arts. Art therapy techniques can be formal, such as when you work with a qualified art therapist. But it can also be helpful to use less structured art activities to help your child work through their emotions. Art is also a proven relaxation technique, and it allows children and youth to connect with themselves in a very non threatening way. For example, if your child is reading a book about worries, have them draw a picture of the characters and use thought bubbles to show what the character is worrying about, or have them paint what they think an emotion could look like. And lastly, for this age group, we have a tool that falls in both creative arts and sensory, Play-Doh. Play-Doh helps build fine motor skills, improves cognitive flexibility, or how our brain is able to switch between tasks, and it encourages imaginative play. When we're talking about emotions or worries or fears, we're talking about something that is mostly abstract. Play-Doh can be used to make these things feel more concrete. For example, if your child is afraid of spiders, they can make a spider out of Play-Doh and practice swishing it. Activities like Play-Doh can also be used to give your child a break. For example, at the end of the school day when kids come off the bus, they need time to self-regulate, and Play-Doh is a really great thing for that. Keep in mind that mostly I mean this as a solitary activity by themselves in a calm, safe space. This might not be the time to practice some sharing with younger or louder siblings. Lots of children, both on the spectrum and neurotypical, benefit from art as a way of expressing themselves. And don't worry if they prefer computer animation, pencils, paper, pens, it doesn't really matter. The modality isn't important. Art can give your child a safe and therapeutic outlet for their emotions. As we mentioned in our introduction, there are 4 parts to this mini-series, and 3 of these focus on age-specific strategies. We encourage you to continue to join us throughout the series, as there may be strategies helpful for your child and family, regardless of chronological age. And don't worry if you're unable to attend all 3 sessions, we will be recording them and they will be available on demand. The link is here on the slide if you're looking to access the introduction or if you want to come back to it later.
So we're happy to answer your questions now. And again, you can put them into the Q&A box just below your screen here.
And it looks like when you registered, there were a couple of questions, so we can get started with those. Someone was just wondering about strategies for regulation in community settings. I don't know, Beth, if you want to start with that one.
Sure. Yeah, I think this question is asking kind of in those public spaces, if our child's dysregulated, if they're having a bit of a hard time, what are some things as parents and caregivers that we can do to support them? So the first piece that I would talk about would be around co-regulation. And we talked about this in the strategies for early childhood or for younger children as well, where sometimes it's helpful to be mindful for us as the adults in how we're feeling and kind of what's happening in our own bodies. And that can help us when we're trying to help our child feel calm. What strategies can we use? Some of the strategies Danielle talked about today, even around mindfulness and breathing. So if we're in that kind of stressful situation, maybe we're in the mall and we're trying to do some holiday shopping and our child is not having any of it, what can we do to help keep ourselves calm so then we can then pass that along to our child? And the other thing that I would suggest is just when we were talking about those sensory strategies. So thinking about what the environment that you're in, what it looks like, and maybe what might be some things that can be causing some of that dysregulation. So is there an opportunity to kind of move to a quieter space? Call it like a sensory safer space where maybe there's a little bit less noise or visual input going on, where we can, again, both kind of have that opportunity to calm down and to regulate ourselves. Danielle, is there anything you would add to that?
I think it's just important too to be kind to ourselves, especially this time of year when we know we're all going to be in these higher stress situations. Sometimes we just have to do whatever we can to get through that moment and to get through that stressor, because it can feel insurmountable in that moment. But just to remember to stay calm and to do our best to figure out something that can get us through to that next few minutes. Do we need to remove the child for a minute? Do we need to go for a little walk? Do we need to go outside? Do we need to take a break? Sometimes just being kind to ourselves and our kiddo is pretty critical in that moment. It looks like there's a similar question specifically around sensory seeking strategies. So this one's more about school environment, but I think it could apply to a community setting as well. I don't know if we have any great resources around the sensory piece, Beth, that you'd want to share.
For sure. And I think actually in your resource section, so we did have a webinar series a little while back that was a 3-part series that talked about some of the background around what we know about sensory processing, what that might look like, and some of the actions or behaviors you're seeing in your child, and then talking about some strategies that you might want to try either in the community, and then in this case we're talking about school. So I think this was asking about proprioceptive and vestibular strategies. So obviously this is a very knowledgeable person who's asking these questions. When we're talking about vestibular, we're talking about our sense of balance, our head positioning, kind of where we are in relation to gravity. And that's why sometimes we see kids playing around with things like spinning and putting their head upside down and doing somersaults or doing all kinds of things on the playground equipment to kind of test that sense of gravity and where they are in space. So if you are an educator or if you're in the school setting and you have opportunities to incorporate some of that play into your day-to-day, sometimes it looks like unstructured activities. We're just, again, playing around on the playground and testing out the equipment. Sometimes that looks like maybe some structured gym activities where you're going through some yoga poses, or you're playing follow the leader or follow my actions, and then playing around with doing some of that spinning, jumping, anything where we're, again, moving our head position. And the other question was around proprioceptive input. So what that means is the information we're getting into our muscles and our joints. So again, where our body position is, our body awareness. And sometimes we can support that with what we call heavy work. So anything where you think of, when you're doing chores as an adult, you're raking leaves, you're carrying a pile of wood. How can we replicate that in the classroom? Maybe we're having a helper that's helping us to move chairs or move the desk. Maybe they're carrying a heavier backpack or a stack of books. And if we're older children and we're seated at our desks, maybe we're looking at doing some chair push-ups. So we're just using our hands to push off of our chair or push off of our desk, or some wall push-ups too. I know some people like to use strategies just general for adding movement to their day in the classroom. Things like Go Noodle videos are great for just having a quick little movement break. We know that we learn best when our body is active. So anytime we can add those movement breaks or movement strategies into our classroom, that's a great opportunity for learning. Danielle, did you want to add anything? Sorry, I went on for a little bit there. I get excited about sensory information, so.
Totally okay. So I think the message too is to absolutely check out your resource list. That's where that sensory series that Beth is talking about is. There also will be, if any of you follow us on Facebook or Instagram, there will be a new resource coming out soon around sensory tools and fidget toys and just some more specific options and ideas. So watch for that. There is a similar question about resources. This one's about books. We have a couple of people asking about book recommendations for older groups or around actions and consequences. And so there is some books on your resource list. There's some workbook style books, so things that your child could actually work through or you could help them work through. But we also are very excited to share a new resource that just went on our website this week called our Book Gift Giving Guide. There we go. Quite a tongue twister. But that will not be on your resource list as it's brand new. And I'm wondering if we can share that in the chat so that you can all have it. It has a whole list of books for ages, for siblings, for parents. We're very excited to share. There's also an Aid Canada library. So Aid Canada is one of our partners, and they actually have a lending library where they will mail you the books that they have in stock, and then you'd be able to access those for free and you can mail them back. So we'll also put the link to that in the chat so that you can have that resource as well. Anything else around books that I might be missing, Beth?
I think someone was asking about books where the child can choose what happens next, and I'm just thinking of those choose your own adventure novels. So if you're asking about older children, sometimes kids really like to go back and see how the story would play out differently if they tried a different choice. Just like in our real life, we don't often have those opportunities to redo things, but sometimes that's why we see kids, watch the same movie over and over again, or watch the same show over and over again, because they can see that predictable outcome of what's going to happen. And often kids like that in things like video games and role-playing games, where they can try on different personalities and try out things that they like. So if you're able to access a choose your own adventure, I know there's also Netflix has some choose your own adventure shows. So if you're looking for things to incorporate into screen time that can be interactive as a family, I think there's is it a Puss in Boots special where you can choose what happens to the character next. So that's always a good social learning opportunity, right?
I'm gonna have to check that out. I've never heard of such a thing. So we do have lots of other questions here. Thank you guys so much for putting them in the chat. Somebody was asking about resources around social conflict and perception issues. As far as some of those social skills pieces, there are some really great groups out there. They are normally through private practitioners. So there's things like peers, which would be for teen groups, children friendship training, social thinking, all different names, but they all teach that kind of skill of how to cooperate with others, how to participate, and they're usually very age specific. Through the school boards, they also do offer them. So if you don't have access to funding right now, or it's not kind of that priority to be looking into social skills groups, then you can reach out to your schools and find out too, do they have anything to offer for your age group? That might be a good place to start, because really that social skills piece, there are a lot of really great evidence-based group therapy programs that would benefit your child. Anything else, Beth, around the social skills piece?
I think that's all great information.
Okay. I'm going to go on to the next one here. So someone is wondering about how to teach a child to tell if they're hungry or thirsty. So I think this speaks to that interoception piece. So I'll pass it again back to you, Beth, if you have some resources to share.
Absolutely. So Danielle did mention during the presentation, if you look up the term interoception, there's lots of great resources. There's some great YouTube videos that you can find just to kind of learn about that concept. But we do know that sometimes our kiddos struggle with understanding what's happening inside their body. And sometimes those feelings of hungry or full or thirsty don't quite connect to what this means and what do I need to do next. A few of the things that we can try are even just having more of a set schedule or having reminders, again, particularly for older kids. You can even use an app, or if they have access to a watch, that sets reminders to kind of do those body check-ins. You don't necessarily need to have everything scheduled, down to the minute, but maybe there's times that are scheduled for a quick water break, or through our school day, we often have those nutrition breaks built in. But just having the opportunity to do a quick check-in and see, how does my body feel? How does my tummy feel? How is my brain feeling? And sometimes making those connections to what might be happening. Maybe my tummy is hurting because it's hungry, or maybe my brain feels fuzzy because I'm kind of thirsty. So definitely a skill that needs to take some time sometimes to develop. But the other thing to keep in mind is just, if you do have a kiddo who's at home and they have access to snacks throughout the day, sometimes that can cause us to disconnect a little bit from those feelings of hungry and full. And so particularly maybe during the school break, over the winter break, if kids are home and there's snacks that are just available, it does make it harder for us to understand when we're actually feeling hungry. So sometimes it's nice to keep maybe more of a regular schedule, similar to what they may have at school, where there's still regular times during the day that you have a scheduled nutrition break or a snack break, but we're not just, we call it grazing, right, throughout the day, eating goldfish crackers all day, and then never really having that chance to feel hungry or full. Did you have anything to add to that, Danielle?
No, I think that's great. And again, it is on our resource list, some of those things around interoception if you're looking for more information. We do have a couple of questions about school. So we have a family who the child is struggling with using some foul language and some conflict with some other students, and they're trying to kind of copy what they're hearing from their peers. And I think this kind of brings us back to that same social skills conversation about ensuring that they're part of some kind of group therapy session or therapy or skill building as far as how to have appropriate conversations. What do social skills look like? Because my guess is that copying is really motivated by trying to make friends, right? Trying to fit in, trying to connect. And so doing that repeated language is what they're trying to do. We're all motivated to make that friendships. So I think that children's friendship training, social thinking, like I said, there's a few different ones, but absolutely reach out either to your private team or if you're part of a children's treatment center or through your school to see if any of those social skills are connected. Beth, is there anything? I'm trying to think if there's anything else related to that question that might be helpful.
I'm just noticing that we're running out of time because it is 12:30 now, but I did want to suggest too, I know there's a few questions about school and sort of how do we implement some of these strategies at school and how does that, what does that look like? And so just a reminder that this presentation will be, or is being recorded and so will be available on YouTube in a few weeks, I think. So if you do want to share this link with when you're having conversations with your school team, sometimes that might be helpful to make sure that everybody's on the same page. And then if they have questions, they can be welcome to ask us as well.
And if your school team or your school board is open to having conversations with us here at Autism Ontario, we're always happy to help present this kind of information to your school teams to work together collaboratively to ensure that children have what they need in schools. We do a lot of that kind of presentation and education. So absolutely, if that's of interest to your school teams, they can reach out directly to Autism Ontario and we can help.